Senator Cramer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for accommodating this format. And thanks to all of our witnesses, and congratulations to all of you on being nominated. I've been watching attentively and taking some notes, and I want to explore a little deeper, Ms. Boomraskin, some of the context. Your exchange with Senator Kennedy, where you were trying to explain the context of your editorial, your op-ed relating to risk and in the oil and gas industry in particular, the fossil fuel industry in particular. I went back and read that same piece after that exchange to familiarize myself both with the content and the context. And you're right in that you were writing in response to the expansion of the Main Street Lending Program that we worked hard to get because oil and gas industry, huge jobs industry, and huge national security industry in our country was being sort of set aside, ignored, if you will, by the Main Street Lending Program. And yet we were building bridges for all kinds of other industries, none any more important, certainly, than the oil and gas industry. So you're right that was the context in which you wrote your piece. But as I read the piece, you did not confine your advice or your opinions to simply the Main Street Lending Program. There was no strategic ambiguity whatsoever in your statements. And I am very concerned going forward, not just because there's a single nominee that shares these views that you share so vehemently and so rigorously, but rather that there've been lots of them and lots of areas, lots of agencies, and more than one or two with the Federal Reserve, various positions in the Federal Reserve. I'm very concerned about that. I've appreciated your reiterating the script that the Fed's job is not to pick winners and losers, But once you're in a regulatory role, it's not just the regulations that matter, but it's as much as anything the regulator themselves. So I have great concern about your position and the increased power that you want to give to the Federal Reserve as it relates to allocating capital away from legal commerce. You used an interesting word in describing the parameters as you see them. You used the word resiliency, and that's an important word. It means something very important, but it also means a lot to our economy as it relates to energy. And so I want to just sort of flip the script a little bit on you and ask if you think that it is a risk that banks ought to consider if market that they support has a less than reliable or resilient supply of energy. If you're Texas or other parts of the South or the Southwest, Midwest that has failed resiliency tests in recent times, or the Northeast or California, where they've gone away from base load electricity, for example, and replaced it with more intermittent forms of electricity, that people actually die when that electricity doesn't work during cold times, or that manufacturing has to be curtailed during certain times because they're very energy dependent. Is that a risk that you think the banks ought to consider and that the Fed ought to keep an eye on?
So thank you, and thank you for for attempting here to understand context. And I do want to underscore that the Federal Reserve, as far as I know, is not looking to expand its powers. The Federal Reserve has mandates, very clear mandates that that Congress has provided, and the Federal Reserve, I hope, and certainly if I were confirmed, needs to always act within those parameters. It is absolutely critical to independence. It is critical because it's the law, and it's necessary to not get into positions of regulatory overreach or regulatory matters that are way beyond the purview. And what is way beyond the purview? Well, one thing that's way beyond the purview is that it is bankers who are making the decision about who to lend to. That is not a Fed decision, and it never should be. I don't have any evidence to suggest that it is or that it would be, but it is not a regulator and supervisory function for a regulator to take over the basic business decision that the bank is making. And why is that? Because banks exist, first of all, they're private entities, right? And they are in the best position to know what kind of loans should be made. They are in the best position to know what kinds of terms need to be structured around any kind of credit extension. That is their expertise. And that is an expertise that I would argue needs to be maintained. So I certainly appreciate the fact and the cardinal principle that the Federal Reserve does not exist to be favoring any particular sectors. And the regulatory approach should not be in any way choosing certain sectors over others.
I wish your previous rhetoric matched that. I know I'm well over, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me. I'll provide some more comments.